And joining me now from Washington is roll call columnist Jon Allen. Okay, Jon, it seems like as the polls widen, we hear more and more about these allegations that he's alluding to about the elections being rigged. We've heard it a number of times on the campaign trail. But most recently, last night, what do you make of this?
I think Donald Trump is setting America on a course for an angry election no matter what happens. The interpretation that him losing Pennsylvania would be due to voter fraud is completely unfounded. There are almost no examples of voter fraud nationally or in Pennsylvania in recent elections. In the last 6 elections, presidential elections, the Democrat has won Pennsylvania. The number of votes, as my friend Greg Giroux at Bloomberg has done some work on, the number of votes coming out of southeastern Pennsylvania where Democrats do very well is way up from 1988 and very much not up from other parts of the state where Republicans do well. So it is an uphill battle for Republicans to begin with in Pennsylvania. 6 straight Democratic wins there in presidential elections. And Donald Trump is doing even worse than the normal Republican candidate does. So the idea that if he loses, it's going to be because of some sort of cheating is hard to fathom.
And we know not only is he making these allegations, but now he's even soliciting volunteers to be election observers. We know that each state has their own legal process to become an official election observer, but what legal ramifications does this have by making these claims and calling for these volunteers?
I'm not sure that there's any real legal ramification here. We could see something akin to what we saw in Florida in 2000 during that election, where you had what they called the Brooks Brothers revolution of aides going down to be observers of recounts. There is a level of intimidation, obviously, that comes with observation. But look, there are observations around the world of elections. So as long as people are are responsible about that duty, then it's okay to watch the voting and the counting.
And we should note also, Jon, that the campaigns actually can send out monitors if they wanted to, right? That's not out of par.
Right. I mean, that's not abnormal at all to have a campaign send people to polling locations to keep an eye on what's going. However, with Donald Trump accusing people of cheating before any ballots are cast, that puts a certain spin on the way that his supporters will look at what's going on in an election.
Yeah, and using those allegations to recruit as well. I want to take a look at some battleground polls that were just out Friday across the board. Shows him down, and the polls from earlier this month kind of show a similar trend. What states do you think are going to be his biggest challenge when it comes to November?
I think all of the typical battleground states that we look at are going to be huge challenges from him, whether you're talking about Virginia or Colorado or North Carolina. If you're talking about some of those places that he thought he was going to pick up in Michigan and Wisconsin, those don't look to be within reach for him at the moment. The one state that seems to continue to be close and closer than the other states in that battleground mix is Florida, where the latest polling has him down about 5 points in Florida. In some of those other states like Pennsylvania, as you mentioned, 10 or 11 points. Virginia, we see something similar. Colorado, we see something similar. So I think the big concern for Republicans right now is that the polling may be undercounting the gap between Clinton and Trump because there is no Trump organization on the ground in these states. And so when he goes to try to turn voters out, it's going to be very difficult without an organization to do that.
But Jon, hasn't that been part of the problem, that there hasn't been enough emphasis in trying to recruit new voters, get people registered? Why is he spending so much time in just trying to say that there's going to be election fraud and you should register to be an observer? Why not tell them to register to vote?
I wish I knew the answer to that question, Rena. And I think the Republican National Committee and Republicans across the country would like to know the answer to that question. Why is Donald Trump sitting on money and not spending on advertising right now at a critical time for framing the debate, framing the race? Hillary Clinton spending millions of dollars during the Olympics when they get an opportunity to get folks who might be casual political observers. So I think Republicans are wondering the answer to that question just as you and I are. And Donald Trump is not following any path that seems to be close to a normal political one.
You know, there was a big movement here. We heard a lot of buzz in the newspapers this week about how there was a dump Trump movement, that the Republican National Committee might be trying to dump him. It was interesting. Chairman of the RNC, Reince Priebus, actually appeared with Trump yesterday at 2 rallies in Pennsylvania Friday. It was a pretty rocky week for them. What do you think the message was he was trying to send?
I think he was trying to send the message that that there will be accountable political professionals near Donald Trump for the remainder of the election. It's not so much that Donald Trump needs Reince Priebus by his side as much as Reince Priebus would like to be by Trump's side and try to prevent him from going off script. I mean, in terms of election fraud, that's not a charge that is necessarily atypical. We don't usually hear it this early out in a campaign, but it's certainly something we hear. It's not so far out of the bounds of normalcy for, and I'm using a made-up word there, normalcy, for political campaigns and particularly for Republicans to charge voter fraud. So that's much better. That's a much better message for Donald Trump than the one he had earlier this week, where Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton were founders of ISIS.
Right, and I also want to talk to you about tax returns. That was a big story yesterday morning. The Clintons released a couple of years of tax returns. I should note, last summer they released a bunch of tax returns from 2007 up until around this point. I want to ask you, Trump, they're continuing to put the pressure on Trump to release his tax returns. Do you think that his refusal to not release them will have any impact ultimately on the voters?
I don't think it's going to have a big impact. It certainly reinforces a narrative that he may not be worth what he says he's worth, that his businesses may not have been as successful as he says they were. But I don't think that's going to be the ultimate deciding mechanism for anybody. I think more than anything, what it does is allows the Clinton campaign to try to draw some sort of equivalence between documents that have been dug up about her and those that Donald Trump is not releasing. She put out her tax returns yesterday, a 34% federal rate on about $10.6 million for her and President Clinton last year.
I want to ask you, though, about some negative headlines with the Clinton Foundation and the State Department, sort of that mix between the two, and whether there was any sort of gray areas of intersection of using their influence at the State Department. Do you think this is going to have a lasting impact as we continue on in the coming months leading to November?
I do think it's an important question for Hillary Clinton to address. I think that there's been damage done to her ratings in terms of honesty and trustworthiness from the email scandal. The last couple of drips and drabs that have come out from Judicial Watch, an organization here in Washington, have not been as headline grabbing as they might have liked. But I do think that the American public deserves an accounting from Hillary Clinton of what her views were about the relationship between the Clinton Foundation and the State Department, and how she would act as President of the United States to prevent people who have donated to her political campaigns, who have donated to the Clinton Foundation, and who paid her money for speeches from having undue influence over her White House and her administration if she's elected. I think that now is the time for us to find out, because if we don't now, it's certainly not something she's going to offer up once she's elected, if she's elected.
And you had a column talking about calling for transparency from Clinton. Worth a read for anyone who hasn't checked that out. Jon Allen from Roll Call in Washington. Jon, thank you.
Always my pleasure, Rena.